Welcome back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today is Asad Malik, an entrepreneur, and Honorable Wilbur Ross, the former U.S. Secretary of Commerce from 2017 to 2021. They're joining us to talk about a very exciting topic about a company called iRocket and its venture into space and a space project with Saudi Arabia, a hot and developing topic with implications for both commercial and military uses in the future. Thank you so much again for joining us today. I want to start before we get into the discussion of the nitty-gritty of the company, how it all works. How did this concept come about, and how did the two of you connect?
Well, when I was Secretary of Commerce, part of my department was the responsibility for the commercialization of space. So I went around to lots of the launches, went to various conferences, visited most of the major players, and became absolutely fascinated with the transformation that was then beginning and now is continuing. Namely, instead of just being a scientific curiosity, it was now becoming a very economical and very essential part of our business activities and indeed of our social activities. And that was caused in no small measure by Elon Musk's successful launch of a big rocket, the bottom section of which was reusable. So when I learned that Assad had invented a rocket where the entire thing would be reusable and therefore increase both the frequency of launches and lower the individual cost directly, I became convinced that this was a potentially transformative activity for low Earth orbit, LEO satellites. And so that's how we got started together.
That's absolutely right. And being on a leading edge of low-cost access to space, I have to emphasize that being able to create this opportunity for various different countries that currently don't have sovereign launch capability to launch their own satellites, being on this leading edge to make access to space more accessible and affordable, it's going to open up space to a variety of new applications that aren't being applied today. For instance, airlines will own their own space clusters, which will allow high bandwidth communications when you're taking a flight. Farmers in rural villages in Pakistan and beyond will be able to monitor their own fields for crop production, which is too expensive to do today, and so it helps to democratize space, and that's why what we're doing is really, really important. It will help to not only democratize space but help to close the digital divide, and we'll be able to help transport thousands of state-of-the-art satellites to low Earth orbit, where they will help to shape the future of autonomous vehicles, telemedicine, 5G high-speed internet, the internet of the things, and online education and more.
So how did you develop this concept, and how did you get into making rockets in general?
Yeah, so basically, we started off back in 2019 with a contract with U.S. Space Systems Command. We were working to develop 100% reusable launch systems for the U.S. Space Force, and with some early stage funding from Bill Gates and Reid Hoffman's early stage fund, Village Global, along with some government contracts, we started developing these next generation 100% reusable launch vehicle engines.
you, did your competition take that? Because it is indeed a revolutionary breakthrough, and quite obviously, I can see how some companies who are already in the space might not be happy about this development.
Sorry, what was the question?
Was there any pushback from the competition? Was there any attempt to kind of discredit or question the feasibility of this concept?
No, I don't think so. I mean, most of the companies in the space were focused on building expendable launch systems. SpaceX came along, and they had built Falcon 9 that is partially reusable, and so they had kickstarted a revolution on bringing the costs down and building more sustainable systems. And so, I don't think there's a doubt that what we're building is a very, very sustainable system for the foreseeable future, where both stages of the launch system return back to the launch site, and so it'll open up a whole new part of space that everybody can help to utilize. We'll be able to focus on not just transporting satellites to low Earth orbit, but also a down mass business where we can also bring things back from space. So whether it's a biotech company, like Space Pharma that's focused on growing perfect protein crystals in a microgravity environment, or Merck Pharmaceuticals will be able to bring back, their payloads as well. So I think what we're working on is pretty revolutionary, and there wasn't any pushback from the competition per se. I think that instead, other companies, are also trying to move towards that direction.
So how does your business model manage to balance innovation with the economic realities of building and operating rockets?
So it's an interesting question, right? So as I was saying earlier, within the space, most companies were focused on economies of scale or an expendable, launch system model where they would mass produce many vehicles, spread their costs over multiple vehicles, and they would in turn build millions of dollars of hardware, and that hardware would then be launched one time, and then it would be lost. So what we're working on now is going to basically solve the problem on how do you build a more sustainable company and a more sustainable product. Launch vehicles are the future of space logistics, but how can it be done more sustainably? And so building 100% reusability into the equation is absolutely essential.
On the other hand, there's been some controversy or at least some concern about the potential overcrowdedness in space because of all the satellites, constellations, various launches that are likely to only increase over time. From a regulatory perspective, how can the U.S. government and frankly other governments manage, on the one hand, to encourage innovation, exploration, and scientific discovery, but on the other hand, ensure that the space is safe for everyone and that environmental impact is not overly increased by this multitude of objects entering the space?
Well, I think from a government point of view, there are several answers to that. First of all, from the point of view of physical security of a satellite is a very vulnerable object. It's on pretty much a predetermined orbit, so it's easy to know where it is. And it's very vulnerable in that the solar panels that provide the ongoing power for it are very, very easily damaged. So from a defense point of view, you have to launch huge hordes of them to make it much more difficult for a potential adversary to knock out your system because it's not that hard to do. Both the Russians and the Chinese have deliberately knocked out in a test one of their own satellites just to show that they knew how to do it. So that's one solution. The other solution is we need satellites to have better systems of space awareness, situational awareness, and space traffic management, because there's a huge amount of space up there. But as the satellites disintegrate, and remember, they don't have an infinite life. The early ones probably barely have a 10-year life, and the later ones maybe 15. So they're constantly disintegrating, and even small particles can damage the satellite because they're moving at 14,000 miles an hour. So it's a serious problem, and one of the main ways to combat it will be to have a multitude of satellites.
And is that something, to your knowledge, that is currently being reviewed, or has there been so much focus on, say, the Golden Dome and related uh, specificities that the particulars of more commercial activity have been sort of not prioritized?
Well, satellites are increasingly becoming useful in everything. For example, the little gadget in your car that tells you how to find your friend's house, that's all driven from a satellite. So nobody would know how to get anywhere anymore without that satellite communication. Second, the banks, the whole financial system is becoming increasingly dependent on satellite communications. And one of the big objectives, particularly in the Gulf countries, is developing secure satellites, secure in the sense of protecting their information from being tampered with or hacked. So there's a lot of effort going on right now to modify existing satellite concepts in terms of the new ones. So it's just like other technological products, before too long, some of those earlier satellites will be technologically obsolete.
So what would you say is our rocket's clearest competitive edge? Is it the technology? Is it the agility? Or is it the alignment with these emerging space economies?
I think Asad, you'd be better at answering that one.
Yeah, I think it's certainly the technology. The technology enables us to recondition, reload, relaunch in under 24 hours, giving you the agility and speed. And so that fused with reducing the cost and increasing the launch cadence that a lot of these satellite constellations are looking for, I think is a huge, huge game changer.
So now we know that there's a number of countries that have been pursuing space innovation. There's been a few Gulf countries heading in that direction. How did the partnership with Saudi Arabia come about?
Wilbur, you want to take that one or?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Um, there's several countries that have been innovating their space programs, and a few of them were Gulf countries. How did specifically the partnership with Saudi Arabia come about?
Well, I think the Gulf countries very much need the military security, the defense aspects of satellites. You saw in the war in Ukraine how
Mm-hmm.
important the intelligence of what the enemy was doing is to one's ability to wage war on the ground. And so there's no question that it's essential tool in modern warfare. And therefore, it is essential that they have secure means of communication. Also, think about it. Regular ground communication is easy enough also to knock out. How
Mm-hmm.
could you defend yourself if you had no means for your forces in separated areas to communicate with each other? So they desperately need secure communication both among themselves and in terms of the intelligence as to what the enemy is doing. I
Now,
think you will
mm-hmm.
see every Gulf country having a large number of satellites for those multiple reasons. If you only have 2 or 3 satellites up, too easy for an enemy to knock them out,
Mm-hmm.
or even some other criminal just trying to invade your financial system.
Mm.
So I think it's essential that countries have large numbers of satellites.
Yeah, and with Saudi Arabia, I think the other thing that's key here is it's definitely aligned with their national priorities and their Vision 2030 plan. So
Mm-hmm.
it aligns really, really well with some of the space clusters that they're interested in developing and launching. To Wilbur's point, their digital sovereignty, resilience, economic diversification, job creation and leadership around that, I think is absolutely key.
It's interesting development, particularly as at the same time Saudi Arabia is pursuing defense and commercial partnerships with China on a variety of projects, ranging from defense to telecommunications. I'm wondering whether there is any conflict of interest either for iRocket as a US-based company or for Saudis themselves in their pursuit of secure telecommunications, given that China is playing such a major role in terms of other types of networks and communications.
Well, so far, US companies are far more technologically advanced than
Mm-hmm.
China, and therefore they are the best hope. Further, since you could list China as a potential adversary, just as you could list Russia as a potential adversary, do you really want your system to be dominated by those people? U.S., as you know, is a staunch defender of the Gulf countries,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, it is not going to tamper with things. It's not
Mm-hmm.
going to put little bugs in the system that they could use to the disadvantage of the Saudi countries. It's really not practical for a small country on its own from scratch to develop a whole panoply of all the different varieties of space, not just the launch part, but the satellite design part, the software to make the satellite work. This is a very, very sophisticated business. And unless you have a lot of experience, it's hard for you to be at the very cutting edge.
That's all definitely true, and actually, uh, the uh, this leads me to the next question. To what extent is Rocket's global strategy uh, is relying on partnerships with sovereign space programs, and to what extent it's more looking towards more limited domestic uses or some non-sovereign non-state programs um, in terms of maximizing its use, maximizing its business and outreach.
Yeah, great question. So one of the things that we're focused on here in the US is basically developing capabilities so that we can participate in this Golden Dome initiative where we can launch our vehicles to VLEO and basically deploy not just satellites but drones. This will be a real game changer for protecting the U.S. and its interests. And, above and beyond that, there's certainly other commercial partnerships that we're interested in outside of developing, relationships with sovereign countries. There's different commercial constellations that are being put up. And, we're providing that service to basically get all of these birds up there as that sort of last mile delivery service. And so, there's many different companies out there that are of interest to us that we'd want to partner with, whether it's Planet Labs or Capella Space or others. I mentioned earlier there's biotech companies that want to bring back their experiments where they're synthesizing new drugs in a microgravity environment. So just like that, there's many different applications.
So the Golden Dome has been very much in the news lately, particularly given that many people don't quite understand how it's going to work, whether it's going to be sort of a layered initiative or whether it's going to be essentially just a combination of existing applications with some limited innovation and upgrades. How do you see it, and how do you see iRocket fitting into that? In what sense is this drone feature going to be something that you see applied directly to the Golden Dome, or just a separate defense feature that can be used anywhere regardless?
So I think the Golden Dome initiative has actually several areas that we might be able to participate in. I think there's a disruptive technologies area, an aspect, along with a testing aspect, and being able to demonstrate this capability of deploying drones in a VLEO environment, I think is exceptionally game changing for a lot of defensive applications. And so I think that there's other applications as well. One of the other products that we're developing is a Hydra 70 missile system. And so being able to develop a lot of these solid rocket motors, increasing them from 2.75 inches to, let's say, a Patriot PAC-3 size, we'll be able to participate in other programs that would help to shield, the U.S.'s interests and help protect, us here at home. So building these larger scale solid rocket motors that basically get integrated into these larger interceptor programs, I think is also a very instrumental aspect of the Golden Dome initiative.
You say would be the key technological breakthroughs in that regard, and how close would you say some of these projects are to full operational maturity?
So we've already built and tested our 2.75-inch, solid rocket motors. We have a flight test actually tomorrow of our Hydra missile system, and we've already upscaled our launch vehicle engines. We have an upcoming test coming up for the Leo launcher later this year. So stay tuned for more.
Really very exciting development, and I'm so glad that we have a chance to talk about it. Now, I can now getting back to Secretary Ross for a second. How would you say a balance between government-funded launches and private commercial contracts shifting in the next 5 to 10 years, or are they really going to shift?
Well, they're complementary, not competitive.
Mm-hmm,
Many of the launches, for example, that SpaceX has been doing are military and other government in terms of the users. So
mm-hmm,
the mingling of the two is already prevalent, and that's inevitable because it's like anything else. The more of this that you do, the better you get at it. And particularly if you're a company that's set up to be innovative, like a SpaceX or like an iRocket or like a few others are. So I think the relationship between government and private sector is inherently a collaborative one rather than an either or. And I think you're finding that NASA is coming, for example, to understand that very, very clearly. They cannot help but be impressed with how the costs have gone down once the commercial sector got into it. And think about it, governments, while they're wealthy, are not of unlimited wealth, and they
mm-hmm.
like to do things as economically as they can. And I think history is very rapidly proving that private sector is better at those kinds of activities than a government is.
Indeed, I could say that unfortunately the governments worldwide, not just US, are lagging very far behind in some of these private breakthroughs. And speaking of private companies like SpaceX and Rocket Lab, what lessons has iRocket drawn from observing their trajectories in the launch ecosystem and just in general?
Sorry, what was the question?
Were there any lessons to be drawn from the observing the trajectory of other companies in the space, like SpaceX, Rocket Lab, and anyone else?
Well, I mean, I think one thing that I can certainly say is space is hard, and you certainly want to make your mistakes early and
Mm-hmm,
be able to rapidly iterate and learn from those mistakes and just reiterate and go for a model where you can rapidly retest
mm-hmm.
and re-demonstrate the capabilities until you get the results that you're looking for.
We are hearing now that there are new developments also in Europe and in Taiwan that are looking to develop their own, not only space programs in general, but also satellites. Is that something that you've been looking at, especially since on the one hand, they're trying to like catch up to the US, but on the other hand, they may be leapfrogging around some of the processes that the companies here have been going through.
Oh, yeah, but the advantage the US has is we are launching far more
Mm-hmm,
spacecraft than anybody else, not many more than China, many more than anyone. There was a big article recently, I think in the Financial Times, reminding us that 2025 was supposed to be the year when China felt it could catch up to the US in space, but it's become perfectly clear that that has not been accomplished. And the Russian space program, other than doing the hypersonic missiles for direct military warfare, not obviously not for communication, other than that, the Russians aren't really doing that much in the way of space launches. For a while, they were strangely subsidized by the US. In about 2010, President Obama ceased having the U.S. do its own space launches, and instead he started paying the Russians to do it, and it was paying them up to $85 million per seat to get our astronauts to our own space station. So that during that period, it got a little out of control. But what saved it was, in fact, the advent of private entrepreneurs, mostly Musk and Bezos, who had, for their own reasons, always been captivated by space. And they stepped in and started figuring out, how do you do this whole thing both more efficiently and with continually improving the technology. But the Russians and the Chinese don't have that. They don't have these kinds of companies functioning, and it just is a head start that we have. Now, that's not to say that China won't move very aggressively to try to catch up. They will, they already are, but it's a very rapidly moving target. They don't have, for example, they don't even have anything comparable to the partial reusability that SpaceX has. That's how far behind they are. SpaceX has had that for some several years.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, Wilbur, I did also read about an article where, because Russia has been hit by sanctions pretty hard, they're finding it very, very difficult to build new rocket engines. So, it's actually going to be quite risky for them, and their space program moving forward, given the geopolitical things that they're entangled with. And so they have a lot of supply chain constraints that are going to degrade, both their military and civilian satellite production, quality and timelines, in addition to hindering their ability to build new rocket engines.
Now, one of the things I've been noticing is sort of a growing collaborative efforts between different countries and different companies representing those countries in, first of all, basically sending people into space in general, but also in terms of investing and creating joint projects related to space. To what extent do you think that's this sort of multipolar investment a growing trend, and to what extent are sovereign interests, in what sectors would you say entirely sovereign development still prevails, and to what extent the multipolar trend is replacing it?
Well, that's a complicated question to answer. I think in a very real sense, it doesn't matter whether it's one company or another that's making the advance. Question really is, in which countries do the technologies reside? Where are the scientists? Where are the people who are doing the next step? And remember, in World War II, the Germans came very close to becoming a space power, and the original space scientists in the US, down in Huntsville, Alabama, were in fact Germans who came over after the war and joined our effort. So in that sense, even the US had to import a lot of its original technology.
Wasn't that called Project Paperclip, Wilbur?
Yes, yes, yes.
So that actually brings me back to your partnership with Saudi Arabia, and essentially that question about technology and um On the one hand, the kingdom is trying to localize advanced manufacturing and high-tech industry. On the other hand, they clearly have to rely on international partnership. How does that balance work?
Well, and it isn't just one set of science.
Mm-hmm.
For example, one of the great strengths of iRocket is the engines, the motors themselves. Um, their team, some of whom came out of SpaceX, some of whom came out of NASA, some of whom came out of Rolls-Royce, which makes jet engines, some of which came out of elsewhere. So iRocket's key strength and what has really enabled its total reusability of the rocket is it has developed an engine that can reverse thrust. It's a very complicated thing technologically, but it's a totally different technology from the technology that SpaceX or anybody else is using. Maybe you can go into that a little more, Asad.
Yeah, absolutely, Wilbur. So I think the engine is definitely a key. We've designed the first reusable engines that are focused on longevity, long life. We're using a very unique cycle called an expander cycle. It's the same cycle that took us to the moon, and it basically allows us to get great performance while allowing us to operate under low temperatures and pressures, which effectively allows us to increase the service life on key critical components within the launch vehicle engine that burn up. So the combustion chamber liner, turbine blades, just key critical elements that melt in the launch vehicle engine. We're able to increase that service life quite extensively. And so what we've designed and developed is a system that allows us to recondition, reload, relaunch, payloads in under 24 hours. And with minimal maintenance, we're able to bring back the vehicles to the launch site with the payload fairing intact. And then basically, we're limited by, how quickly we can, repeat those metrics. Whereas other launch companies are limited by how many more launch vehicles they can build each month because they're focused on this economies of scale business model where they have to mass produce many, many vehicles. So that's one thing that's critically important. The other thing that I would say, we have a patent pending on an upper stage heat shield that's deployable, and that allows us to bring back the upper stage, and being able to reuse 100% of the vehicle has significant cost advantages because we're able to amortize a lot of the costs over multiple flights.
And in partnership with the Saudis, what is it that is being prioritized, at least by them? Is it the launch? Is it the manufacturing, or is it the data services that are affiliated with this?
Well, Assad is also going to be innovating a different form of manufacturing. He will be much more using robotics than the other companies are. And that has very big, profound implications for the cost structure because it again lets you get to bigger volume more quickly. Well, one of the problems is that when you're building a small number of, 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 of rockets or satellites or anything, you have diseconomies. You have diseconomies of scale. So if you can get to where your factory is sufficiently automated that you can produce more, then you get into the benefits of scale. So you have not only the economical savings from a superior technology, but you have further savings in the actual manufacturing itself. You might want to go into that a little, Asad.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have a video that I can also potentially share if I can get the
Yeah,
permission.
absolutely. Let me just do that.
So here's our upper stage concept that I was talking a little bit about. So we've patented the heat shield that's deployable. And so you can see that the panels extending out from the sidewalls of the vehicle, they create a shuttlecock-like shape. And this helps to provide a stable reentry shape, and it significantly expanded the base area that greatly reduces the ballistic coefficient of the vehicle. So this low ballistic coefficient means that the vehicle has a reduced heating and lower temperature, and thus it allows it to use less exotic and more durable heat shield materials than on other vehicles. So unlike the delicate tiles that are on the space shuttle that were frequently damaged and required significant maintenance in between flights, this heat shield material is designed to be more robust and allows for rapid reusability with no refurbishment on normal missions. And so the heat shield has an aperture at the base that also allows the engine to fire through it. And during the entry, process, it's protected by this deployable cover that you see here. And if you keep watching, that opens up on landing, and here's a nice visual to see.
That's great. And that looks like it could solve a lot of the problems that we've been facing. And that actually brings me naturally to a question that's on everyone's mind, which is energy and data. And how do you see the intersection of energy, data, and space? First of all, interacting with our rocket and its entry into this sphere, given that sourcing energy and figuring out how to keep the data and store the data has been, you know, a big dilemma for many companies. And on the other hand, also in terms of Saudi Arabia, how do they view this intersection in terms of their own economic diversification, as they've also been kind of chasing some of the energy security and energy efficiency projects, data projects, but all of that still is not clear how it ultimately plays out.
Wilbur, you want to take a stab at this one?
I didn't quite understand the question. Could you repeat it again?
Yeah, I was just asking about the intersection of energy, data, and space. First, in terms of iRocket's own management of these three components, how do you basically source the energy? How do you resolve the problem of data storage? And how does that apply in the space context? And on the other hand, also with Saudi Arabia, how do they view the intersection of these three components in terms of their own economic direction?
Well, I think part of that question relates to efforts to go into deep space, to go to Mars, places like that, requires enormous amounts of energy. And so, what I think will likely happen is that, assuming that the early exploration proves correct, and that it turns out that there is a lot of water on the moon, you're liable to see the moon become a kind of gigantic filling station for rockets on their way to to outer places, because the big amount of energy that a launch requires is in the first part to break the pull of gravity, but the moon essentially has no gravity. And so relaunching for a longer distance from the moon would mean that you would have less weight of fuel to lug up from the ground in the first launch from Earth. You would only need enough fuel to get to the moon, not the huge amount that you need to get to Mars. So I think there will be concepts of refilling that will come into play. And if all this water really exists in the surface of the moon, think about what is water. Water is hydrogen and oxygen. And those are the two components mostly used for rocket fuel. So you could literally have facility producing fuel on the moon, refueling rockets that only had a limited amount to begin, and now used a much more efficient relaunch in a zero gravity environment in order to get to a long distance like Mars. So I think you're going to find not just pure technologically inventive solutions, but practical inventions that will deal with these issues. Now, there are some people who think eventually there'll be a whole new form of energy, maybe some kind of nuclear, maybe even some kind of solar, but those are probably a long ways off. So they're not going to solve any immediate needs that the space industry has.
And for the time being, do you have to secure agreements with energy companies, with data storage companies, in order to provide for your needs?
Well, why don't you describe the fueling process, Assad?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think at this stage, where we're working with KSA is they certainly want to build satellite communications, encrypted data transfer for sovereign control and data flows and such via orbit. And so this concept of data centers in space still has not been confirmed, although it could be a strategic ambition. One of the things that we're interested to do is we're interested to forge new partnerships with companies that are potentially building these lunar power stations that could power those data centers in the short run.
So I've been hearing a little bit about that. There are some companies that were literally wanting to return us to the moon with that specific purpose in mind. Is that currently feasible?
I think it's an interesting concept, and I think we'll certainly know over the next 10, 20 years if it's cost efficient and if it's a doable model for sure. I think Jeff Bezos has certainly stipulated that it is, and that moving manufacturing to space and moving data centers to space certainly will help to solve the power consumption problem. I believe Eric Schmidt also has speculated on this topic as well, in buying relativity. And that was one of the goals that he had in mind when he had bought them. For us, we may be looking to partner with Rolls-Royce, for instance. They have a company called Rolls-Royce Small Modular Reactors. And so, in this small modular reactor company, one of the ideas that they had was to develop a concept for a micronuclear reactor that could, one day provide reliable power on, lunar colonies. And so, there could be companies like Rolls-Royce that we partner with.
That seems pretty exciting, especially since SMR is also pretty much taking off here on planet Earth. And why not, if you can bring them to space and maximize that issue, the controversy over potential environmental impact on Earth might be less of a problem for people who are pursuing innovation, certainly.
I think building a stable power station on the moon could solve a lot of problems, such as surviving long lunar nights, dust, high radiation, there's thermal extremes, there's a lot of other issues with launch mass constraints, regulatory safety issues,
Mm-hmm.
so absolutely. And I think the sort of power trade-off there is very viable, but I think in the upcoming years we'll certainly see what kinds of battery storage, fuel cell types of solutions are coming about, and what kind of solutions a lot of these companies are thinking about with respect to nuclear reactors.
So, in term, do you see yourself moving in terms of broader space value chain? Do you see yourself more focused on the launches or moving more upstream into satellite operations or doing a balance of both?
I think we'll most likely stay on, launching a lot of these constellations and deploying them into precise orbits to go on the schedules of the constellation operators, which is a huge benefit for us and for them in that it fulfills our business case, and it also helps to speed up their business case with their investors. In addition to that, I mentioned that we're also building solid rocket motors, and we're building automated factories to basically reindustrialize the defense base. That's focused on the arsenal that's been depleted, and so with doing so, building these motors for larger interceptor programs also would be a strategic ambition. But I think for now, I think that's as far as we'll venture out.
So, finally, in terms of the Middle East and potential partnerships there, do you see any additional opportunities there that are different or greater than what the West has to offer, either due to regulatory nature, due to funding nature, or due to diverse or different interests that they have? Or do you see it pretty much aligning with the type of projects that the West is exploring and building?
So I think what I understood from your question was you wanted to know what the West is trying to build on the launch side.
No. I was asking whether, in terms of partnership, future, existing or future partnerships in the Middle East, do you see them as providing any additional or different opportunities from what the West has to offer, either in terms of having different interests, different regulatory frameworks, or different funding sources?
I see. I think certainly a lot of these countries are focused on building sovereign launch capability. And, given the current geopolitical climate in the Middle East, countries like Qatar are certainly going to be very interested in building up their own, capabilities on the defensive side. So, it'll be interesting to see what other, sort of collaborative efforts come about. But I think some of the things that we're seeing is there's a lot of appetite for partnership, and potentially to build localized plants and to hire a local workforce and to basically train people and help to modernize and build these next generation cutting technologies that could help not just build sovereign launch capability, but also help to protect the sovereignty of a nation.
Finally, one last question to each of you. What do you hope to see in the next 10 years, and what do you think you will see in the next 10 years? Both in terms of either in terms of our rocket or the space development in general.
Wilbur?
I think during the next 10 years, there will be so much more learned, particularly about what happens to the nature of materials when they're exposed to a no gravity or low gravity environment for a long period of time. And the same with people. We don't really know what will be the long-term consequences to people of being in that unusual environment for lengthy periods. Now, we inadvertently are getting a test of that because of the delays in bringing our people back from the space stations.
Mhm.
But even that was not such a huge period. What we do know is that materials of all sorts take on different characteristics when they're in outer space, when they're in a no gravity environment. 3D printing is different. Pharmaceuticals function differently. There are a lot of things that occur differently when you're in the outer space environment. And since that's a relatively new activity, our knowledge is relatively limited. So I think in parallel to the commercial and military developments, what you're also going to see is changes in manufacturing technology brought about by the potential for taking advantage of these changes that occur as a result of being in the no gravity environment.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think just to add on to that, I think some of the things that we can see over the next 5 to 10 years is direct to device satellite communications, whether it's space-based cellular or low Earth orbit broadband that serves, remote geographies in underserved countries or underserved locations throughout the globe. I think we'll certainly see a return back to the moon and lunar infrastructure being developed for various different purposes. I think mining on asteroids is another rather interesting concept. So I think we'll see some rather interesting demonstrations there, and sort of with respect to data centers, I think that with the demand of AI, Earth-based resources, cooling energy, I think a lot of these things will become constrained, and so it may be expensive, but we'll see what the early R&D demonstrations look like for a lot of these systems.
Thank you so much to you both. This was a very exciting discussion, and I think it will genuinely spark a lot and inspire a lot of hope and imagination and interest in a lot of people, both in the field and outsiders looking in and hoping to learn more about the area. I wish both of you the best of success in everything, and I hope and I'll be watching for the next big thing. It's already big. It's going to get even bigger, and I'm very excited about your journey.
Thanks so
Thank you so
much.
much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for being so well prepared for the interview.
And just to let you know, in addition to actually streaming the video, I'll hope to write an article for the American Bar Association's Science and Technology section about this. So if I manage to get that in, I'll send you the link once it comes out.
Uh-huh.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Looking forward to it. Bye now.
Thanks. Bye.